saying that they would publish a chart like that because it's like they're telegraphing that there's a massive fraud coming. Like, why do they think they should publish something like that? Because if that's the truth and that's the reality that's going to be going forward, shouldn't they be doing something proactively to stop it?
Well, they're telling you, this is what the U.S. Treasury is telling you. Hey, suckers. Hey, U.S. taxpaying suckers. Just so you know, this is you. And that's the way Ponzi schemes work, right? Everybody is in on it. Okay, the Ponzi operator, the Madoff, the Jerome Powell, the Janet Yellens, they can't operate this sort of obvious Ponzi if they didn't have willing dupes.
Hey guys, welcome back to Let's Talk Crypto. In today's video, we have Bitcoin advocates Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert commenting on a chart published by the U.S. Treasury Department of the projected debt held by the public from 1980 to 2096. Stacy says their plan is to print even more money for the next 75 years, and for the public to be the suckers who end up paying for all of this. Keiser calls it a fraudulent Ponzi scheme, and says the debt spiral and fiat debasement is 100% certain. That's why Bitcoin comes as a life raft for people all over the world, especially in countries like Lebanon that just devalued their currency by 90%, or Nigeria that restricted the amount of money anyone can take. Keiser also refers to the global insurrection against banker occupation, as he comments on last week's protests in France, regarding pension reform, and the overall effects of inflation. Let's listen to Max and Stacy as they go over this last phase of global collapse into more detail. But before we do, please consider subscribing to our channel, as we bring you daily content on the latest crypto news. And now, let's jump right into the video.
Lynn Alden, who's a really excellent analyst. And so this is, I'm looking at this chart now, this incredible 45-degree angle straight up into oblivion of debt. And it starts now. They're projecting this incredible increase in debt. To see what Lynn says, austerity historically doesn't work well once you get over 100% debt to GDP. GDP is so reliant on those deficits that cutting deficits hurts GDP too, right? So she's making the comment that to manage this debt, to get into an austerity budget, to try to bring the debt down, you know, it's an impossibility. It's the old sea spider anus analogy. And doesn't that portend, though, doesn't that suggest that they would come back with massive money printing?
Well, that chart looks like money printing.
Yeah.
Certainly their plan is, they're telling you for the next 100 years, or I guess it's about 75 years, that their plan is to print a whole bunch more. And their plan is, of course, also for the public to be the suckers at the poker table to buy this. This looks to me kind of like the Celsius bankruptcy documents as well. It certainly looks like a Ponzi scheme and a quacks like one.
But, you know, Greg Foss, so he said that the debt spiral, pure math, and even the Fed cannot ignore. Fiat debasement is 100% certain. So I guess this, you know, this is the tie to the Lebanon, right? So Lebanon went through this 90% devaluation on their currency, and this has been a story that we've been watching in horror for the last couple of years, and the inevitability of this debasement was coming. And of course, everyone was suggesting to them to buy Bitcoin. And but for the U.S. economy and the world reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, this type of debt debasement, which seems on the horizon, of course, spells global problems. But that's got to be now part of a growing wave, or what we called many years ago, the global insurrection against banker occupation. And I think I saw a big headline this past week in France, millions of people out in the street. Usually when you say there's a protest in France, it doesn't mean anything because they're always protesting. But this seemed to be bigger than normal, and it's about the pension reform, raising the pension age, and the overall effects of inflation and the loss of quality of life. And that's part of that global insurrection against banker occupation, right? So for 30 years, bankers have been ignoring reality, hoping that at some point there would be enough growth to generate enough tax to generate some pay down on all this debt that they've incurred, and that hasn't happened. They just printed a lot more, and the debasement of the currency has followed. And now it's at the point where people have reached the end of their rope on a global basis. And into the mix is Bitcoin, and that seems to be the life raft. Certainly it is here in El Salvador. More and more people are talking about Bitcoin in this context, in the global context, saying that globally things look effed up and Bitcoin fits in as a solution.
As governments seem to have no other choice but to print more money, Bitcoin comes as the only solution for people all over the world who want to protect their wealth. In the next segment, Keiser says we're now entering a phase of total collapse, where the US is playing a dirty game to sustain this situation, and Stacy compares the protests in France to the protests of people who lost money on Celsius or FTX, but should have known they were scams right from the start.
The fact is, like those French people protesting because the retirement age is going to reach 64, it's just like the people who are protesting the collapse of BlockFi or the collapse of Celsius or the collapse of FTX, all these like alleged victims. Just like Bernie Madoff's victims, you thought you were benefiting from some bag holder somewhere else, some chump, some stupid idiot who is even dumber than you or your cousin or your mother or whoever. So you were counting on that. And the same thing with everybody in Europe, everybody in America who thinks that all that free money, all the lockdown money, all the PPP, free health care that 60% of the population receives, that the other 40% has to pay, all of that Social Security that's been promised to them, all of that stuff is they deserve it, and that there was no cost to it, that this is like what they signed up for. I signed up for the 13% yield. Where is it? Like, it's as we'll mention, Peter Schiff, like he was right about that. He asked Mashinsky where the yield was coming from, who was paying it, and in fact, it was a Ponzi scheme. And anybody who was in on Celsius, anybody who is an investor in Celsius, anybody who owned Celsius token, anybody who owned BlockFi, people like Corey Clipston were out there telling you that these are obvious scams, but you chose not to listen to it.
The Bernie Madoff story is a good analogy, and it's a good story to revisit, right? Because they were being investigated. It wasn't until the third time that the SEC got into the Bernie Madoff story that they finally busted him. But during that whole time, there was this nod, wink attitude from the people that were investing in Bernie Madoff, who knew kind of either consciously or subconsciously that there was some fraud going on, because he was delivering these results that were completely inconsistent with anything happening in the market. But people became a sense of entitlement, because he went and he visited folks who were doing important things and had important charities, and it made them feel like, we're going to bring you in because you're an important person. It's a classic confidence game, because confidence games rely on giving somebody else the confidence to invest in something that might not be great for them. And when you get to the DeFi, the whole DeFi epoch in post-Bitcoin shenanigans, and everything after Bitcoin has been proven to be pretty much worthless. The DeFi period, which came after the ICO period, immediately it was like, okay, they wanted to sound like it's a financial product. Remember, the ICO sounded like an IPO, so it's kind of something to do with finance. And DeFi, distributed finance, these DeFi products, it sounds legit. But as you point out, and as even Peter Schiff pointed out, once you offer yields that are above a 10-year Treasury yield, you're starting to take risks that you shouldn't be taking. And once you get into the yields that they were offering, it's quite obvious that they are engaged in what was be a classic Ponzi scheme.
Well, they're telling you, this is what the U.S. Treasury is telling you. Hey, suckers. Hey, U.S. taxpaying suckers. Just so you know, this is you. The public is going to own all of this. The public is you, and you're you're the ones that are going to have to buy that. And that's the way Ponzi schemes work, right? Everybody is in on it. Okay, the Ponzi operator, the Madoff, the Jerome Powell, the Janet Yellens, they're obviously the operators, and they can't operate this sort of obvious Ponzi. Mashinsky couldn't operate his Ponzi, which was so obvious, if they didn't have willing dupes. Like the dupes are the ones who think like, wow, this is awesome. Like, obviously it's a scam. Obviously it's a Ponzi. But I know some suckers I could flip this to.
Saying that they would publish a chart like that, because it's like they're telegraphing that there's a massive fraud coming. Like, why do they think they should publish something like that? Because if that's the truth and that's the reality that's going to be going forward, shouldn't they be doing something proactively to stop it?
Well, they can't, because it's the exact opposite. So if that's their chart, and then this is Bitcoin's emission schedule. So
well said. Yes, exactly.
So it's a predictable model, and theirs is predictably insane and predictably chaotic.
Yeah, well, the interest on the debt now in the U.S. is, I think it's becoming the biggest line item in the budget ahead of the Pentagon. So you're entering into that phase of a collapse where the interest on the debt is not even payable by the taxes you're collecting. And then that's a game over. So, I mean, the game, I guess, is that the U.S. is still going to claim to have the best, the cleanest shirt at the laundry, right? Like it's going to be relatively better than all these other fiat monies. And that's how they're going to sustain this going forward. But at some point,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's the sea spider anus will either regrow the anus in one way or another. So it's either going to print more money, it's going to roll it up into a CBDC or an IMF SDR, or what empires usually do is, of course, invade and take somebody else's shit. Now,
Right.
they did that with Russia. They took $650 billion of Russian treasuries and gold. That's like half the debt interest payment in a year. So there's not enough countries on Earth to invade. Hopefully there's some life on Mars, because we've got to take somebody's shit. There will always be, like I said, that 80-20 rule. 80% of the people will fall for American Psycho, right? Ted Bundy, they got people to come into their car. You know, Ted Bundy didn't kill every single woman he encountered, because some of them saw his fake smile and they're like, that guy's a lizard. They survived to basically give the police the information about what the guy looked like. But 80% of them fall for the smile, and they fall for the free money, and they fall for the money printers and the nice suits, and they're so nice. And why are you toxic maximalist, so toxic? Well, we should get more and more toxic.
You don't hear that much anymore. This whole, oh, you're a toxic maximalist, right? Not in the last 6 months, since everything blew up.
Maybe it's just obvious to those of us in the 20%. The people in the 80% will probably never see it because they don't want to see it. Like all those people protesting in France, they could have seen it for the last 40 years. Like we all saw the number. We all saw this chart. This is them pretending their retirement wasn't going to be a problem. Like they're all like, hey, we're all going to retire together and have 4,000 euros a month, and we get to have a second home in the Côte d'Azur. And you're like, okay, but you do see this numbers come, like you're all planning on the same thing.
There's a great chart that Nassim Taleb used to run all the time before he became like an unpopular. A nut job. But it was a chart, something like turkeys before Thanksgiving. Right. And for 364 days, it's great. And then on one day, suddenly it's complete disaster. It's Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of charts we're talking about. So the turkeys, we're all heading to that arbitrage at the end of the long siesta of complacency. And then suddenly it all hits at once. And everyone's like, oh, what happened?
As inflation continues to rise and global economic conditions degrade, more people are coming to realize the importance of protecting their money against fiat debasement. Bitcoin being a better form of hard money than gold in this digital age, it's to be expected that Bitcoin adoption will only continue to grow. But the question on everyone's mind is, can it dethrone the dollar and become a global reserve currency? What are your thoughts on this matter? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give us a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. This is Let's Talk Crypto, and we'll see you in the next video.